The first sound was a choked, desperate wheek, a sound so alien to the usual happy symphony of Patch's contented noises that it sliced through the quiet Saturday morning like a shard of ice. It was followed by Lily's scream, a raw, piercing cry of pure terror that clawed its way up my throat and tightened around my heart. I was in the kitchen, a half-written keynote address on the neuropsychological benefits of animal-assisted interventions spread across the island, the scent of brewing coffee momentarily grounding. That grounding shattered. Lily. I was moving before the cup clattered from my nerveless fingers, coffee splashing like dark tears across my research notes. My daughter's bedroom was just down the hall. The dread that uncoiled in my stomach was cold reptilian, a primal fear that every parent knows and prays. They never have to truly confront. I burst into her room, a room usually bathed in soft sunlight and the gentle rustling of Patches in his spacious custom-built enclosure. But the sunlight today seemed harsh, unforgiving, illuminating a scene of unimaginable horror. Lily, my bright, sensitive 8-year-old, was pressed against the far wall, her small hands over her mouth, her eyes wide and dark, with a terror that stole my breath. And in the center of the room, next to Patch's now silent enclosure, stood Karen McMillan, president of the Evergreen Meadows Homeowners Association. Her face, usually a mask of pinched disapproval, was flushed her chest, heaving slightly. In her hand, or rather under her hand, was the thick, spiral-bound Evergreen Meadows HOA Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions Handbook. And beneath that handbook, protruding slightly, was a still small furry shape. Patches, my Lily's beloved emotional support guinea pig, crushed. A wave of nausea so intense it made the room tilt, washed over me. Time seemed to distort sounds, muffled, except for Lily's ragged, whimpering breaths and the thundering of my own pulse in my ears. Karen McMillan looked up, her expression, not one of remorse or even surprise, but of grim, righteous satisfaction. "Dr. Vance," she said, her voice clipped, devoid of any human warmth. "I had to take action. This rodent was a clear violation of Bylaw 7, subsection C, paragraph 2. No nuisance animals, including but not limited to undomesticated rodents, shall be kept on any property." It was making a mess. The smell was permeating the common areas. "I warned you." My voice, when I finally found it, was a choked whisper. "Patches." I took a step forward, then another, my legs feeling like lead. Lily let out a small broken sound, a kitten's mew of unbearable pain. He was her emotional support animal. "Karen," I managed the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "Registered, documented. You had the paperwork." My mind, the part of it that wasn't screaming, was already cataloging, analyzing the professional in me, the director of the National Center for Emotional Animal Affairs, fighting through the paralyzing grief of a mother. The deliberate use of the HOA Rulebook, that heavy, unyielding symbol of her petty tyranny, as the instrument of death. The symbolism was as brutal as the act itself. Emotional support. Karen McMillan scoffed, withdrawing her hand from the handbook, leaving it lying there like a tombstone. "That's just a fashionable excuse for flouting the rules, Dr. Vance. We have standards in Evergreen Meadows, standards I am obligated to uphold." She nudged the handbook with the toe of her sensible loafer. Patches did not move. I finally reached Lily, pulling her trembling body into my arms. She was cold, so cold. Her eyes were fixed on the spot where her best friend, her confidant, her furry, four-legged therapist, lay still. The silence from Patch's corner, usually filled with his gentle weeks, his contented purr-like rumbles, his happy munching on fresh hay, was a vast, echoing void. "You killed him," Lily wailed, her voice muffled against my shoulder, her small body racked with sobs. "You killed Patches, you monster." Karen McMillan's lips thinned. "Don't be hysterical, child. It was just a guinea pig. You can get another one. Perhaps a more suitable pet, like a goldfish. They're very quiet." The callousness of her words, the utter lack of empathy, ignited a cold, precise rage within me, a rage that burned through the initial shock. I looked at her, this woman, who had just shattered my daughter's world, who had brutally extinguished a small, innocent life, and I saw not just an officious HOA president, but something far more malevolent. "Karen," I said. My voice dangerously calm, each word carefully enunciated, "You have no comprehension of what you've just done. This wasn't just killing a guinea pig. You've committed a heinous act of animal cruelty. You've terrorized a child, and you've done it with a level of premeditated malice that is frankly sociopathic. I gently disengaged from Lily, guiding her towards the door. Go to your daddy, sweetie, now. Lily, after one last tear-filled look at Patches, stumbled from the room, her cries echoing down the hallway. I turned back to Karen McMillan. My grief was a raw, open wound, but my training, my life's work, dedicated to understanding and protecting the human-animal bond, to fighting against exactly this kind of cruelty, clicked into place. I am Dr. Eleanor Vance, Director of the National Center for Emotional Animal Affairs. My entire career is built on the science and ethics of human-animal interaction, animal welfare, and the profound psychological impact of animal abuse. You, Ms. McMillan, have just become a case study. Her composure wavered slightly, a flicker of uncertainty in her cold eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. I was enforcing the bylaws. You were not enforcing bylaws, Karen. You were committing a crime, a felony in most jurisdictions. And the fact that Patches was a registered emotional support animal, crucial to my daughter's well-being, elevates this far beyond simple animal cruelty. What you have inflicted on my daughter is tantamount to emotional terrorism. I pulled out my phone. I am calling the police. And then I am going to dedicate every resource at my disposal, every connection I have, every ounce of my expertise, to ensuring you are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. You will not walk away from this. Her face, for the first time, showed a glimmer of fear. But it was too little too late. The line had been crossed. The rulebook, her weapon of choice, would now become Exhibit A, in a case that would explore not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of compassion, the sanctity of the human-animal bond, and the devastating consequences of its brutal severance. The arrival of the local police officers, a young woman with tired eyes named Officer Davies, and a more seasoned, grim-faced Sergeant Chen, felt surreal. Lily was with my husband Robert in our bedroom, her sobs a constant, heartbreaking soundtrack. Robert, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, had wanted to confront Karen himself, but I'd insisted he stay with Lily. This needed to be handled with cold, hard procedure. I explained what had happened, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in my hands. I pointed to Patches still partially obscured by the thick HOA Rulebook. I recounted Karen McMillan's words, her justification. She in turn reiterated her defense to the officers, her tone indignant, portraying herself as a beleaguered enforcer of necessary community standards. It's a rodent, officer, she insisted, gesturing dismissively. They carry diseases, and the rules are very clear. Dr. Vance, despite her supposed expertise, seems to think she's above the rules that apply to everyone else in Evergreen Meadows. Sergeant Chen looked from Karen to the rulebook, then to me. Dr. Vance, you said this guinea pig was an emotional support animal. Yes, Sergeant. Patches was prescribed by Lily's pediatrician and her child psychologist to help her manage anxiety and sensory processing challenges. We submitted all required documentation to the HOA, including letters from both medical professionals over a year ago when we moved in. Ms. McMillan has been aware of his status from the beginning. I had copies of everything meticulously filed, a habit ingrained from years of navigating bureaucratic systems for animal welfare initiatives. Officer Davies knelt carefully, her expression softening, as she gently lifted the HOA handbook. Beneath it, Patches lay crushed, his small body unnaturally still, his once bright eyes dull and lifeless. A tiny, perfect paw was outstretched, as if reaching for something. The sight ripped a fresh wave of grief through me. Davies visibly flinched. Ms. McMillan. Sergeant Chen said, his voice hardening. Did you physically use this handbook to crush the animal? I may have placed it firmly, Karen McMillan said, her bravado faltering slightly under his direct gaze. To contain it. It was agitated. Agitated, I interjected, my control slipping for a moment. He was in his secure enclosure. Karen, you entered my daughter's room, opened his cage, and then you murdered him. That's a highly inflammatory accusation, Dr. Vance, Karen said, though her eyes darted nervously towards the officers. We'll need to take statements from everyone, Sergeant Chen said. And the animal, Dr. Vance, I assume you'll want a necropsy performed. Absolutely, I said, my professional instincts overriding my maternal anguish for a moment. By a certified veterinary pathologist. I need a full report on the cause of death, extent of injuries. Chain of custody for Patch's body will be critical. This was evidence. Evidence of a brutal, deliberate act. As Officer Davies carefully placed Patch's small body into an evidence bag, a procedure I'd witnessed countless times in animal cruelty cases, but never thought I'd endure, for my own family's beloved companion, Karen McMillan was escorted outside to give her statement. The air in Lily's room felt thick with tragedy, the silence deafening. My world, until that morning, had revolved around the intricate, often challenging, but deeply rewarding work of the National Center for Emotional Animal Affairs. As its director, I oversaw research into the therapeutic benefits of human-animal interaction, developed best practice guidelines for animal-assisted therapy programs, and advocated for stronger legal protections for animals, particularly those serving in support roles. My days were filled with meetings, grant proposals, scientific papers, and consultations with everyone from veterans with PTSD seeking canine companionship to hospitals integrating therapy animals into pediatric oncology wards. I knew intimately the profound life-altering connections people formed with animals. I understood the science behind why a purring cat could lower blood pressure, why a loyal dog could draw out a traumatized child, why the gentle nuzzling of a guinea pig like Patch's could soothe an anxious soul like Lily's. Lily, my bright, imaginative, and deeply sensitive daughter, had struggled with anxiety since she was a toddler. Crowds, loud noises, unexpected changes in routine. They could all trigger overwhelming feelings that left her retreating into herself. Patch's had been a furry miracle. From the moment he'd arrived, a tiny squeaking ball of fluff, he'd become her anchor. She'd spend hours talking to him, her voice soft and confident in a way it rarely was with humans. She'd meticulously prepare his fresh vegetables delight in his happy weeks when she entered the room and find immense comfort in his soft fur and gentle presence. He wasn't just a pet, he was her confidant, her emotional regulator, her steadfast friend in a world that often felt too big and too loud. We'd chosen a guinea pig specifically because their docile nature and manageable care needs were perfect for a child like Lily. His presence had enabled her to navigate school with more confidence, to engage more readily with her peers, to simply feel safer in her own skin. Our family life in Evergreen Meadows had been, until Karen McMillan's escalating vendetta, relatively peaceful. Robert, an architect with a calm, steady demeanor, was my rock, fully supportive of my demanding career and a loving, patient father to Lily. We'd moved to this leafy, ostensibly family-friendly subdivision 3 years ago, hoping for a quiet, supportive community. Karen McMillan, however, seemed determined to make our lives, and particularly Patch's existence, a focal point of her HOA power plays. From the outset, she'd been hostile. First, it was a formal letter questioning the appropriateness of a guinea pig as an ESA, despite the comprehensive documentation we provided. Then complaints about the odor of his meticulously cleaned cage, an odor no one else could detect. She'd tried to impose a rule that all ESAs must be conventionally recognized animals such as dogs or cats, a clear violation of Fair Housing Act guidelines regarding assistance animals, which I had politely but firmly pointed out in a detailed written response, citing relevant case law. Each interaction had been an exercise in her trying to assert dominance, and me calmly, factually refuting her baseless claims. I had naively believed that logic and the law would prevail, that she would eventually relent. I had never imagined she was capable of such a monstrous act of violence. The initial police report listed the incident as animal cruelty pending investigation. Sergeant Chen assured me they were taking it seriously, but cautioned that proving intent for a felony charge could be challenging. That's where my expertise and the full resources of the NCEAA would come in. The necropsy performed by Dr. Alistair Finch, no relation to the fictional lawyer in other tales, but a respected veterinary pathologist I knew through my professional network, was heartbreakingly conclusive. Patch's had died from massive internal injuries and suffocation consistent with being crushed by a heavy flat object. There were multiple fractures hemorrhaging. Dr. Finch's report detailed the extreme force that would have been required and the significant suffering Patch's would have endured in his final moments. Each clinical term was a fresh stab to my heart and to Lily's. I spared her the graphic details, but she understood Patch's had died a terrible, painful death. This report was the first pillar of the case. The second would be establishing the heightened severity due to Patch's ESA status and the profound psychological impact on Lily, the emotional terrorism I had spoken of. This wasn't a recognized criminal charge, but it was a powerful concept to frame the narrative for prosecutors, judges, and juries, and certainly for any civil action. I immediately engaged a leading child psychologist, Dr. Lena Hansen, who specialized in trauma and animal bereavement, to work with Lily. Dr. Hansen's reports on Lily's acute distress, her regression, her nightmares, her fear of leaving the house would become crucial. Karen McMillan, meanwhile, far from being cowed, launched her counter-offensive. This was the first of the shocking incidents in the rising action following Patch's death. Through her newly hired lawyer, a notoriously aggressive attorney named Mitchell Thorne, again, any resemblance to other fictional lawyers is purely coincidental in this narrative, she issued a statement to the small local newspaper and on the Evergreen Meadows online community forum. It painted her as a dedicated HOA president, committed to upholding the community's standards, who had been forced to take action against a problematic animal that was causing a nuisance and violating clear bylaws. The statement outrageously claimed Patches had escaped his enclosure and was behaving aggressively, a blatant lie, and that Ms. McMillan had acted to protect the community. It further accused me of using my professional position to bully and intimidate her and of exploiting my daughter's sensitivities for personal gain. The sheer audacity of her lies was breathtaking. She was trying to gaslight an entire community to rewrite the narrative of her own brutality. Some residents, those already in her pocket or easily swayed by her air of authority, posted supportive comments. But many others, particularly those with pets or children, expressed skepticism and unease. The second shocking incident followed swiftly. Karen McMillan, emboldened by Thorne's aggressive stance, convened an emergency HOA board meeting, a board stacked with her allies. The agenda, to discuss recent events involving rule violations and threats to community order. We received a formal notice, which also included a preposterous list of supposed new violations against our property. Lily's small memorial garden for Patches in our backyard, a few painted stones, and a pot of forget-me-nots was an unapproved landscape alteration. The slight discoloration on our driveway from the coffee I'd spilled was a chemical stain requiring immediate remediation. It was a blatant campaign of harassment designed to intimidate us, to punish us for daring to seek justice. At the meeting which Robert and I attended, our hearts heavy, but our resolve firm, Karen McMillan, delivered a speech filled with self-pity and accusations. She portrayed herself as the victim, a martyr, to the cause of upholding Evergreen Meadows' pristine standards. She spoke of outside agitators, clearly referring to me and my professional connections, trying to undermine the fabric of our community. Then her board, in a sickening display of sycophancy, voted to censure us for failing to control our animal and for creating a hostile environment. They even had the gall to attempt to levy a fine for the disposal of Patches, claiming he was HOA property once deemed a nuisance, a legal absurdity Thorne had clearly concocted. The injustice was suffocating. But as I looked around the room, I saw not just Karen's cronies, but also a growing number of residents whose faces were etched with discomfort, with dawning anger. Mrs. Gable, an elderly woman whose beloved cat Karen had once threatened to have removed for sunning itself on its own windowsill, looked particularly incensed. Mr. Henderson, a quiet man who doted on his small terrier, was visibly shaking his head. My professional life, which I had always strived to keep separate from my personal grief, now became an essential tool. I activated my network. I consulted with legal experts specializing in animal cruelty and civil rights. I gathered case studies on the prosecution of cruelty against ESAs. I started compiling a comprehensive dossier on Karen McMillan, looking for any history, any pattern. The midpoint twist began to emerge from an unexpected source. An intern at the NCEAO, a bright young woman named Chloe, who was helping me collate research on local animal welfare ordinances, stumbled upon a series of online forum posts from several years prior in a different state where Karen McMillan had previously lived and served on another HOA board. The posts, under a thinly veiled pseudonym that Chloe expertly traced back to McMillan through digital footprints, were venomous tirades against emotional support animals, calling them a scam, a plague on responsible communities, and advocating for extreme measures to eradicate them. There were even chillingly specific descriptions of how one might deal with small-caged nuisance rodents. This was gold. This wasn't just a spontaneous act of rule enforcement gone wrong. This was evidence of a long-held obsessive animosity, a premeditated mindset. Karen McMillan had a vendetta against ESAs, and Patches, by extension Lily and our family, had become the unfortunate target of her warped ideology. The cruelty wasn't just a byproduct of her obsession with rules. It was an integral part of her worldview regarding these animals. I shared this with Detective Sergeant Chen. He was intrigued. This shows a predisposition, Dr. Vance. It helps establish intent, or at least a deep-seated animus that makes her accidental containment story even less credible. We can use this. The discovery of Karen's online history spurred me to dig deeper. Had she targeted other ESAs or pets in Evergreen Meadows or in her previous communities, I began to discreetly reach out to former residents of her old neighborhood using alumni networks and social media, posing as a researcher looking into HOA policies on assistance animals. The stories that trickled back were disturbing. While no one could point to an act as violent as the killing of Patches, there was a clear pattern of harassment, of imposing impossible rules, of making life miserable for pet owners, especially those with animals that weren't conventional dogs or cats. One woman recounted how Karen had spearheaded a campaign to ban outdoor cat enclosures, leading to several beloved pets having to be rehomed. Another remembered Karen trying to prohibit a child with autism from having his therapy rabbit in the community garden. Karen McMillan wasn't just an overzealous rule enforcer. She was a serial harasser of pet owners with a particular animosity towards animals that provided emotional or therapeutic support, seeing them as a direct challenge to her authority and her narrow vision of a perfect community. The HOA Rulebook wasn't just a tool, it was a weapon she wielded to enforce her prejudices. The third shocking incident in the rising action was Karen's direct attempt to psychologically torment Lily further. A few days after the disastrous HOA meeting, a small, crudely wrapped package appeared on our doorstep. There was no note. Inside, nestled on a bed of cheap cedar shavings, like those used for small animal bedding, was a single wilted carrot, the kind Lily used to give Patches as a treat, and a printed copy of the HOA bylaw. Karen had cited Bylaw 7, subsection C, paragraph 2, highlighted in angry red marker. Lily found the package. Her scream when she opened it was a sound I will carry with me forever. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror and grief relived. This was no longer just about enforcing rules or a dislike of animals. This was targeted psychological abuse of a traumatized child. This was, in every sense of the word, emotional terrorism. I photographed the package and its contents meticulously before handing it over to Sergeant Chen. "This is a direct threat, Sergeant," I said, my voice trembling with a rage I struggled to contain. "She's taunting my daughter. She's reveling in her pain." Chen's face was grim. "We're tightening the net, Dr. Vance. Her lawyer is good, but even he can't explain away this level of vindictive cruelty. We're very close to having enough for the DA to upgrade the charges to felony animal cruelty, citing extreme malice and the targeting of a vulnerable child through her assistance animal." The upcoming annual Evergreen Meadows Community Picnic, an event Karen McMillan usually lorded over with an iron fist, was now set to become the stage for the climactic confrontation. Many residents, outraged by her escalating cruelty and armed with the knowledge of her past actions, which had begun to leak out partly through my discreet efforts and partly through the sheer volume of community anger, were planning a public denunciation. They wanted her out. The day of the picnic was unnaturally warm for late spring. The atmosphere in the community park was thick with tension, a stark contrast to the usually cheerful, family-friendly vibe. Karen McMillan arrived attempting an air of breezy confidence, but her eyes darted nervously and her smile was a brittle, unconvincing rictus. She was flanked by Mitchell Thorne and two of her staunchest HOA board allies, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Mrs. Gable, the elderly cat owner, a woman usually of few words, was the first to speak, her voice surprisingly strong as she stood before the microphone set up for community announcements. "Ms. McMillan," she began, "we, the residents of Evergreen Meadows, have had enough. Your cruelty, your lies, your abuse of power. It ends today." One by one, other residents stepped forward. Mr. Henderson, whose terrier Karen had repeatedly fined for excessive joyous barking. A young couple whose therapy dog, for their son with PTSD Karen, had tried to ban from the common areas. They shared their stories, their voices growing stronger with each account, weaving a tapestry of Karen McMillan's petty tyrannies and escalating malice. Then it was my turn. Lily was not present. She was with Robert and Dr. Hansen at a nearby therapy farm, a safe space far from this confrontation. But I carried her pain, her voice with me. I didn't speak of HOA bylaws or community standards. I spoke of Patches, of his gentle nature, his funny little weeks, the soft comfort of his fur. I spoke of Lily's profound bond with him, of how he had been her lifeline in a world that often overwhelmed her. I presented the enlarged, horrifying photos from the necropsy report, showing the brutal extent of Patch's injuries, the clear imprint of the HOA Rulebook. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Some people wept openly. Karen McMillan's face went chalk white. "This," I said, my voice ringing with controlled fury, holding up a copy of Karen's anonymous online tirades against ESAs, is Karen McMillan in her own words. This is her hatred, her prejudice. This is the mindset that led her to brutally murder a defenseless emotional support animal, to terrorize a child, to tear apart a family. I then detailed her history, the pattern of harassment in previous communities. This was not an isolated incident. This was not rule enforcement. This was the culmination of a long-standing obsessive vendetta against animals and the people who need them. As I finished, Sergeant Chen and two uniformed officers who had been standing discreetly at the edge of the park moved forward. Mitchell Thorne began to sputter objections, but Chen cut him off. "Karen McMillan." Sergeant Chen announced, his voice carrying clearly over the stunned silence, based on new evidence, including forensic findings from the necropsy of the guinea pig known as Patches, expert testimony regarding the animal's status as a recognized emotional support animal, and evidence of a pattern of malicious harassment and premeditated intent to cause harm and emotional distress. The district attorney's office has authorized the upgrading of charges against you to include felony aggravated animal cruelty, a third-degree felony. You are under arrest. The sight of Karen McMillan, the self-proclaimed queen of Evergreen Meadows, being led away in handcuffs, her face a mask of shocked disbelief and dawning terror, was met not with cheers, but with a profound, somber silence. The community had witnessed not just the fall of a tyrant, but the stark reality of the cruelty that had festered in their midst. The climax was not a moment of triumph, but of grim, necessary justice. The falling action began almost immediately. Karen McMillan's arrest sent shockwaves through Evergreen Meadows and the wider local community. The story was picked up by regional news outlets, the headline often focusing on the bizarre detail of the HOA Rulebook being the murder weapon and my role as an expert in emotional support animals. Mitchell Thorne, her attorney, tried to spin it as a gross overreach by the authorities, a media circus, fueled by a personal vendetta. But the evidence was too compelling, the public outcry too significant. The remaining HOA board members, those who had blindly supported Karen, resigned in disgrace within days. An interim board was quickly formed, led by sensible, compassionate residents like Mrs. Gable and Mr. Henderson, who immediately pledged to overhaul the HOA's draconian bylaws and foster a culture of empathy and respect. One of their first acts was to issue a formal public apology to our family and to establish a community fund in Patch's name to support local animal shelters and ESA training programs. Lily's journey of healing was long and painful. The trauma of witnessing Patch's brutal death, compounded by Karen's subsequent psychological torment, left deep scars. Dr. Hansen worked patiently with her, using art therapy play and gentle conversation to help her process her grief and fear. For months, Lily couldn't bear to go near her room, which we eventually redecorated completely, removing all traces of Patch's enclosure, a decision made with Lily's tearful consent. The little memorial garden in our backyard became her sanctuary, a place where she would sit and quietly talk to Patches, leaving him fresh dandelions, his favorite treat. The legal case against Karen McMillan proceeded. The felony aggravated animal cruelty charge was serious, carrying significant potential prison time. The evidence of premeditation, her online history, the pattern of harassment, was key. My testimony detailing Patch's role as an ESA and the profound psychological impact of his death on Lily was crucial in demonstrating the emotional terrorism aspect, which, while not a standalone criminal charge, heavily influenced the prosecution's strategy and the judge's understanding of the severity of the crime. Dr. Finch's necropsy report provided the brutal, irrefutable physical evidence. Facing the mountain of evidence and the prospect of a lengthy, highly publicized trial, she was almost certain to lose. Karen McMillan, on Thorne's advice, eventually accepted a plea bargain. She pleaded guilty to felony aggravated animal cruelty. The resolution was delivered in a packed courtroom months later. Before sentencing, I was given the opportunity to read a victim impact statement. I spoke not just as Lily's mother, but as an advocate for all animals and the vulnerable humans who depend on them. I described the gaping hole Patch's death had left in our lives, the innocence shattered, the trust betrayed. I spoke of the terror Karen had inflicted, the lasting psychological wounds. The judge, a woman known for her stern demeanor, but also her compassion in cases involving vulnerable victims, listened intently. In her sentencing, she excoriated Karen McMillan for her calculated, shocking cruelty and her utter lack of remorse or understanding of the profound harm she had caused. Karen McMillan was sentenced to 2 years in state prison, the maximum allowable under the plea for that specific felony charge without prior violent offenses, to be followed by 5 years of intensive probation. The conditions of her probation included a lifetime ban on owning or residing with any animals, mandatory psychological counseling and anger management therapy, and substantial restitution to our family to cover Lily's ongoing therapy costs and to the community fund established in Patch's name. She was also permanently barred from ever serving on any HOA board or similar community governance role in that state. The community of Evergreen Meadows, in the wake of Karen's downfall, underwent a remarkable transformation. The interim board, with overwhelming resident support, drafted new humane bylaws. They actively fostered a pet-friendly environment, even organizing a Paws in the Park Day, celebrating the community's animal companions. The oppressive atmosphere of fear and petty rules was replaced by a spirit of neighborliness and mutual respect. For Lily, the healing continued one small step at a time. Months after the sentencing, Dr. Hansen suggested she might be ready to consider another animal companion if and when she felt prepared. After much gentle discussion, Lily decided she would like to visit a local guinea pig rescue. There, amidst a chorus of happy weeks, a small, shy Abyssinian with a comical tuft of fur on his head cautiously approached her, nibbling a piece of parsley from her outstretched hand. Lily's smile, the first genuine, unclouded smile I had seen in almost a year, was like the sun breaking through a long, dark storm. They named him Pipkin, Pip for short. He wasn't a replacement for Patches, no one ever could be. But he was a new beginning, a symbol of hope and resilience. The memory of Patches and the horror of his death would always be a part of our family's story, but it would not define us. Instead, it became a catalyst for change, a testament to the enduring power of the human-animal bond, and a stark reminder that the fight for compassion, for justice, for the protection of the most vulnerable among us, whether human or animal, is a fight that must always be waged with courage, with expertise, and with an unwavering belief in the possibility of a kinder world. The rulebook, that had been an instrument of death, now sat in an evidence locker, a relic of a reign of cruelty that had been decisively ended. And in its place in our home and in our community grew love healing and the happy, contented squeaks of a little guinea pig named Pip.